What's up, it's Hannah and welcome back to my channel, and hello if you are new here. Today I'm going to be filming the long awaited chick care guide that I've been planning for y'all for a while now. So yeah, I always get questions about chick care. So today I'm going to be filming a chick care guide. So basically I'm going to be talking about a lot of the basic things that you need to know when caring for your baby chicks and helping them grow and develop. And I'm going to be making a chicken care Q&A very soon. I'm going to be answering some of the questions that y'all have about caring for chicks or ducks or any questions that y'all might have. So be sure to comment your questions down below and I'll try to answer them in a video. And if I'm not able to answer them in a video, I'll be sure to respond to your comment down in the comment section. And in this video, I'm just going to be speaking from experience. So all the things I'm going to be going over today are things that work for me and things that work for my birds. So everything that I might say might not work for you and your birds. So you can just kind of take what I'm saying and kind of see how it works for you and your birds, because this is just what I like to do in my experience. So yeah, I hope y'all enjoy this video and find it helpful. Let's just get started. And I recently just posted a video of all of my favorite, well, not all of them, but some of my favorite chicken breeds. So I'll have that video linked down in the description box in case y'all want to check that out, in case you haven't gotten your chicks yet and you don't really know what breed you want to start out with. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to mention is if you live in the city and you want to get chicks, be sure to check your laws and regulations so you can be sure that you can have chickens where you live. Because a lot of the times, if you live in the city, you have to get a permit and take classes if you want to get chickens. And then I don't think roosters are allowed in some places. So you definitely want to make sure you check your laws and everything, because you don't want to go and get a flock of birds and then fall in love with them and then you have to get rid of them. So be sure you check your laws and everything if you live in the city. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is your brooder, which is where you are going to keep your chicks until they are ready to go outside. What is everybody doing? These East strikers behind me have only been in here for about 2 days, 3 days. I'm currently transitioning them into this chicken coop. So if you see things flying around, it's the East strikers probably. Okay, so your brooder you want to set up before you get your chicks. So if you know you're going to get chicks, you want to set your brooder up maybe before you leave the house, or as soon as you get home, because you want to put your chicks in there as soon as possible. So it's better to kind of have your brooder set up before you go and get them. That way you don't have to worry about them getting chilled while they're waiting for the brooder to heat up. And it depends on how many chicks you have as far as how big your brooder needs to be. At first it doesn't need to be that big, but as your chicks start to grow, they become more active, you'll definitely have to upgrade your brooder, kind of depending on what kind of brooder you have. And you definitely don't want your chicks to be overcrowded, because that can cause stress and conflict between your birds and everything, and that can also lead to them picking on each other and everything. So you want to make sure that everybody has enough room to spread out. It's also not really healthy for them to be in a overcrowded environment because of all the manure and moisture and everything. I personally like using rubber totes for my brooders if I'm keeping my chicks in the house. If you have a lot of chicks, a Rubbermaid water trough would also work really well. And a very common question is how long your chicks have to stay in the brooder or inside. And your chicks need to stay under a lamp or some kind of heat source and in their brooder until they are fully feathered. So that can kind of vary between different breeds of chickens and different chickens in general. But normally they are fully feathered about a month and a half. So you'll know when they're fully feathered, they won't have fuzz anymore. So they're normally about 6 weeks old before you can put them outside. And I would not recommend using a cardboard box for a brooder, because it will absorb all of the water and manure and everything, and it's just gonna get really wet and soggy. So I prefer to use plastic things, because plastic you can clean really easily and it doesn't get all nasty and soggy like a cardboard box would, or Sometimes people will use like newspaper for bedding, and it just doesn't work as well as using plastic and like bedding. Okay, so now I'm going to be talking about if it's better to use bedding or hard cloth for your floor in your brooder. I personally like using bedding over having like wire bottoms to my brooders, but if you do have wire bottoms to your brooders and you don't like having wire bottoms, you could probably like put something over the wire and then put bedding on top of that. A brooder that has a solid floor that has bedding on top of it will help keep your chicks dry, and it will also help insulate your brooder better. And having your chicks on bedding versus wire also helps them develop a natural immune system. And if they're on a wire floor, they're not really exposed to anything because everything just goes to the bottom. So if your chicks are on a solid floor with bedding, they have a better chance of developing a better immune system. That way they can be exposed to different things that are in the environment, particularly coccidiosis, which is really important that they are exposed to. And the hard cloth is obviously easier to clean because everything falls to the bottom, which is normally why people use hard cloth, because they don't have to clean anything. But the hard cloth is really harsh on your bird's feet, so they can cause like sores on the bottom of their feet. And a chick that is resting can get their hock joint stuck in the wire, and if their joint is not removed from the wire immediately, it can swell up and permanently damage their hock joint. And wire bottoms, like I said before, do not allow your chicks to develop a natural immune system because they are not exposed to any microbes that are in the environment, because everything just falls through the bottom of the floor. So they can become ill very, very easily, and they commonly suffer from outbreaks of coccidiosis because they're not exposed to it. And another reason I do not like hard cloth bottoms for your brooders is because it increases the chances of your chicks picking on each other. Exploratory pecking is normal, and if they don't have like a solid floor to peck around in, and for bedding to scratch in, they will normally start picking on each other. I personally like using a solid floor, but that's just in my experience and opinion. Okay, now we are going to talk about bedding because there's so many different types of bedding. And I personally like using pine shavings. It's my favorite thing to use, and I've been using it for my chicks for years now. And I'll use bedding for chicks that are over a week old. If I have hatchlings that are just a few days old, I will use puppy pads or paper towels. If they are not, I would say maybe like under a week old, or maybe like under 5 days old, I'll use like puppy pads or paper towels, because they need to learn how to like eat and drink and everything before having bedding in their brooder. But you have to be careful because you have to make sure that your brooder is well ventilated, because pine contains like phenols and compounds in it, which is completely fine if your brooder is well ventilated, but if it's not, it could cause respiratory problems. But most of the time the shavings have already been like dried out, so all the phenols have pretty much like evaporated already, so the remaining phenols that are in the pine won't really be a problem if you have like a well ventilated brooder. Cedar shavings have a stronger smell because they have more phenols in them, so I personally don't like using cedar. I prefer pine shavings. And then you have aspen bedding. Aspen is what I use for our rabbits. Aspen is not as absorbent as pine shavings, but it lacks the phenols that are in pine shavings. But like I said, like the phenols in the pine shavings is like, it's not a big deal because they've already like evaporated and everything, and if your brooder is well ventilated, it's literally not a problem. And aspen is expensive. Where I live, it's $13 a bag, I believe, and pine shavings is like $4 or $5 a bag. But I prefer pine shavings. Like I said, they're more absorbent, and the phenols is not something you have to worry about. And I think pine shavings are the most common bedding used for chicks. And for your chicks, you never want to use shavings from treated lumber. And you don't want to use like sawdust for your chicks because it can get really dusty and soggy and can cause respiratory problems with your chicks. Okay, so those are like common types of bedding. Like I said before, you don't really want to use like newspaper or cardboard or anything like that because it gets soggy. Okay, so now I'm going to be talking about heat and heat sources. And for my chicks, I normally use a heat lamp with an infrared heat bulb. And if you don't feel comfortable using a heat lamp, there are like panel heaters that you can get called Eco Glow panel heaters. That is a more expensive option. That is something I would personally like to invest in someday, but normally right now I keep my hatchlings in the house, so I have my heat lamp set up safely. But you could always have problems with heat lamps, so if you want to invest in panel heaters, I'll try to link some down below in the description box for y'all. And it's a really good idea to keep a thermometer in your brooder so you know how warm it is in your brooder. But you never want to ignore your chicks' behavior. You want to definitely keep an eye on them as well, not just the temperature, to make sure they're not getting too hot or too cold. If your chicks are all like piled on top of each other, bunched up together under the heat lamp, they're probably too cold. And if your birds have their wings like away from their bodies and they're kind of like dropped and they're panting and they're all kind of like piled in the corners trying to like get on top of each other, but they're probably too hot. If it gets over 117 degrees Fahrenheit in your brooder, your chicks will die in that temperature. So you definitely want to keep a close eye on their behavior and the temperature in your brooder. Comfortable chicks will be like evenly distributed throughout your brooder. They'll be sleeping kind of beside each other, but like scattered a little bit, either directly under the heat lamp or like around the edge of it. And you'll hear like peeping sounds of like contentment, and you'll have chicks like exploring your brooder and everything, and drinking and eating and all of that kind of stuff. You want to make sure everybody is warm and cozy and comfortable. Normally, the first week of your chick's life, the brooder needs to be between 90 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and each week it normally drops 5 degrees. But like I said, you still want to keep an eye on your chicks' behavior. And like I said, you need to have your chicks under a heat source until they are fully feathered. And if you live up north where it's cold, or somewhere where it's cold, and your chicks are fully feathered and you put them outside, they still might be too cold to be like put outside without a heat source. So you might have to offer some type of heat source if they're outside and they're still fully feathered. But I live in the south, so I don't really have to worry about that. Once my birds are completely feathered, they're like good to go. So yeah, just be aware of that. Even if they're fully feathered and you live in a cold climate, they still might need a heat source. And they're normally feathered, like I said, around 6 weeks, sometimes 4 to 6, but I've realized that it's more like 6 weeks before they're like fully feathered. Okay, so now I'm going to be talking about their water and different types of waters and everything. I will normally use the 1 quart drinkers or the 1 gallon, depending on how many chicks I have or how big they are. And that's personally what I find that I like using best for my chicks. I don't use those for my adult birds. I like using buckets, but for my hatchlings, I like using the 1 quart or 1 gallon waters. And hatchlings can go up to 48 hours without drinking right after they hatch, but the sooner they drink, the better. And your water needs to be at brooder temperature, so you can put your water in there and let the water heat up with the brooder, or you can like put warm water in the water source that you have. You don't want your hatchlings to drink cold water because they can chill very, very easily. So you want to use warm water until they're a little bit bigger. And if you order chicks from a hatchery and you pick them up yourself from the post office, they're probably a little dehydrated. So you want to encourage them to drink. You can dip their beak in the water, or you can tap the water like their mama would to try and help encourage them to drink. Don't freak out if everybody does not drink at first. Once one starts drinking, all of them will normally follow along and start drinking together. And like I said, I normally use the 1 quart drinkers, and that should be fine unless you have like between like 20 to 25 chicks. And that's only like when they're small hatchlings. When they start to get like a couple weeks old, you're going to need your 1 gallon water. Even if you only have like half a dozen, they can still knock over the 1 quart waters, even being at like 2 or 3 weeks old. So you might want to switch to the 1 gallon even if you don't have a lot of chicks. And for the first few days, it's a good idea to put like marbles or like clean gravel in the pan of the water, because they can drown very easily, especially if you have bantams. Or like keats. I would put the marbles in the water until they're a little bit bigger. But if you just have like average, like normal sized chicks, you would probably just need to do that for the first few days. But for bantams or keats, I would do that probably for like a week, week and a half. And you want to be sure that you're giving your chicks clean, fresh water, and you want to be changing it often. I normally change mine normally at first at least once a day, and then I'll do it a few times a day, a couple times a day at least. And they're really good at making it dirty and kicking like bedding into it and everything. So you want to make sure that you're cleaning it often and giving them fresh, clean water. And when you first bring your chicks home, they might be a little stressed, especially if you had them shipped from a hatchery. So you might want to give them like a little bit of a booster solution in their water. You can do that by adding like some sugar in their water to kind of help give them some extra calories and energy. But you don't want to do it for more than just a couple days because the sugar can cause diarrhea. So just do that for like a couple days just to give them some more energy and calories and to kind of encourage them to drink their water more. If you want to do the sugar water, you can just put like a tablespoon to a quart. And like I said, just do it for a day or two so it doesn't cause diarrhea. And after that, I like to put apple cider vinegar in their water. I like doing that for my chicks and also my adult birds. Apple cider vinegar will help lower the pH level in their crop, and it will also help fight bacteria. And apple cider vinegar also has a lot of minerals and vitamins in it as well, so that's really good for your birds. And apple cider vinegar also helps with like internal like worms and stuff, so that's another reason why I like to give it to my adult birds as well. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about immunity, and that's something that gets looked over very often, and it definitely shouldn't because it's something that's very important. A healthy bird's small intestines are populated with beneficial bacteria and yeast called intestinal flora, microflora, or like gut flora. They're kind of known by like those three things, which will help your bird's digestive system and will also help stimulate their immune system. So basically the good guys, which is like the good beneficial bacteria, which is the good gut flora, if that is overrun by disease-causing bacteria, then that will take over and cause an intestinal disease. So you want to make sure that you have good gut flora, so you have more good guys than bad guys. And a hatchling will develop microflora through the egg and through the environment, but might not develop it fast enough to be able to fight off bacteria. So I personally like giving probiotics to kind of boost their immune systems. Chicks raised in brooders have the good bacteria offered to them, but they might not get it fast enough. And then chicks raised under a hen will normally develop a better immune system faster because they are exposed to adult birds and they're in the environment and everything. So they'll normally develop a better immune system faster than chicks raised in a brooder. And chicks raised on wire, like I said before, normally don't have a good immune system because they're not exposed to anything. So if I hatched my own chicks or bought chicks and I'm not raising them underneath the hen, I personally like to give them probiotics. And probiotics are a live microflora that you can put in their water or feed in like a powder form. So the whole idea is to boost their immune systems by giving them an early dose of the same gut flora that is going to be colonizing in their intestines eventually. And probiotics work in 3 different ways. The first one being the microflora will attach to the intestinal walls of the small intestines to help create a barrier to block out the bad guys, which is the bad bacteria. Okay, there is a chicken on the hood of my truck. Please don't poop on my truck, Dixie. They will produce antibacterial compounds and enzymes, and they will also help stimulate their immune systems. If you don't want to give your chicks probiotics, you can give them yogurt. Yogurt is a natural probiotic, but probiotics are the same gut flora that they are going to be exposed to. You're just helping them be exposed to it earlier. And I normally get the packets of Save a Chick or the Dervet probiotics, and like I said, it's a powder form that you can put in their water. I normally get it from our local feed store or Tractor Supply. And some people kind of get confused by it saying digestive health on the package because it says probiotics and then underneath it will say like digestive health. But I guess they call it digestive health on the package because the microflora is going to colonize in the small intestine. So I guess that's why they call it digestive health on the package. But that's kind of why people get confused because like they're like, what does digestive health have to do with immunity? But it's because the microflora colonizes in the small intestine. Okay, so now we're going to talk about feed, what feed to give your babies and the different types of feed and everything. Okay, so you have a starter feed, a grower feed, and a layer. Some feeds you'll have like a starter grower, a grower finisher, and then a layer. And then sometimes you'll have like a starter grower and then you switch to a layer. So it just kind of depends on the formula and like what company you go with. Normally I'll have my chicks on a starter grower and then switch to a layer if I'm getting it from our feed store, but Tractor Supply has a starter grower, grower finisher, and then a layer, which is what I do for my ducks, because ducks cannot have medicated feed, and I give my chicks medicated feed, which I'll talk about in a minute. But your birds will need to be on a starter or a starter grower until they are about 8 to 10 weeks. And then once they're 8 to 10 weeks, they can be switched to a grower finisher. But if you're feeding a starter grower and you're not switching to a grower finisher, like between those two stages, you can feed the starter grower until they are laying age and then switch to a layer. But if you're feeding a starter grower or just a starter and then switching to a different grower, you can switch to that grower like 8 to 10 weeks and then switch to a layer after they are laying age. And most of the time, people do not switch their birds off of a grower until they start laying eggs. And they need to be on a layer when they are laying eggs, because a layer is calcium fortified and eggshells are made out of calcium. So hens need more calcium, and most of the time need a calcium supplement on top of the calcium fortified feed. Your babies are not supposed to have the layer because it's too high in calcium for their bodies, and I'm pretty sure it can damage their kidneys if they eat layer before they're ready to eat layer. But most of the time people feed grower until they lay their first egg. I personally have a existing flock of chickens, so normally I'm adding birds to my existing flock. So what I normally do is feed grower until they are laying age, not necessarily until they lay their first egg, but until they're old enough to lay, or they're already grown and maturing. Then I'll switch to a layer, because otherwise I'll have to keep my birds separated until they lay their first egg. So these Easter eggers that are back here somewhere, I think they're in the coop, I just moved them in here a couple days ago, and they are getting close to 20 weeks, so they're okay to be eating a layer right now, but they're not laying eggs yet. And I prefer to give my chicks medicated feed, and some reasons you'll need to feed medicated feed are if you are raising your chicks in warm, humid weather, which I definitely live in the warm, humid weather, so I give medicated feed. And you also want to feed medicated feed if you have existing chickens, or if you are raising chicks from different like hatcheries or different carriers or stores or something. And people also say that you want to feed medicated feed if your chicks are going to be in the same brooder for more than a few weeks, or if you have like a brooder that you use for one set of chicks and then you're using it for a different set and then another set. So that's like, I pretty much do all of those things because I raise different types of birds and everything. So I personally like using medicated feed, but if you don't want to use medicated feed, that's up to you. And you never want to feed medicated feed to waterfowl, because your ducks eat more than your chickens do. So when you have a medicated feed, the medicated feed is measured by how much your chicks eat. And your ducklings are going to eat more than your chicks do. And on top of that, ducklings cannot tolerate as much medication as your chicks can. So even if they only ate as much as your chicks, they would still be overdosed with the medication. And on top of that, ducks eat more than your chicks. So if you feed your ducklings medicated feed, they'll most likely die of an overdose of the medication. I definitely would not recommend feeding medicated feed to your ducklings. And also with ducklings, you'll need to provide them a niacin supplement. Niacin is vitamin B3. Ducklings require more vitamin B3 than chicks do. So if you feed your ducklings a chick-based feed that's non-medicated, it doesn't have enough niacin in it for your ducklings, so you'll have to put like vitamins in their water to kind of help them replenish that niacin that they're not getting in their food. These birds right here are my blue copper Morans. They are going to be moving into this chicken coop. But I have them in this dog kennel right now, which I'm going to be putting them in a bigger dog kennel in here soon. But I'm currently using it for some lavender Orpingtons that I have. Basically what this is a growing pen, so until they are big enough to be let out in this chicken coop, they're going to be in here. But I have them in here so they can kind of get to know my other chickens. but they can't really hurt the babies since they're in a kennel. And they can also get to know the surroundings of this chicken coop. And I have some vlogs of me moving babies outside, so if you would like to see that, I'll have that linked down in the description box. So yeah, that is all for today's video. I hope that y'all enjoyed and found it helpful. Be sure you are subscribed to my channel so you can see more of my future videos. It's free. All you have to do is click on that subscribe button down below, and you can turn on your notification bell so you get notified every time I upload a new video. I love you guys so much and appreciate you so much, and I will see y'all next time. Bye!